At precisely 11:47 a.m. EST, the geopolitical landscape of North America shifted fundamentally as Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped to a podium in Ottawa. In a chillingly efficient display of statecraft, Carney delivered a calculated 272-second press conference that effectively signaled the end of the American energy status quo. There was no preamble, no room for questions, and absolutely no invitation for negotiation. The brevity of the address was a message in itself. The era of talk has concluded. Carney announced that Canada is immediately triggering Phase 1 of its economic transition measures, a move that serves as an aggressive opening salvo in a burgeoning trade war. This is not a mere warning or a diplomatic flair regarding the looming March 18th deadline. It is a live, high-stakes demonstration of consequence. By initiating these protocols 11 days ahead of schedule, Canada has surgically stripped away any lingering American illusion of a bluff. The move proves that Ottawa possesses not only the tactical capability to dismantle the U.S. economy piece by piece, but also the cold political will to see it through, if their 5 core demands remain unaddressed. The immediate fallout from this announcement is nothing short of staggering, sending shockwaves through global commodities markets and the U.S. industrial heartland. Effective today, Canada has instituted a total moratorium on all new crude oil export contracts destined for the United States. While the Prime Minister clarified that existing contracts will be legally honored until their specific expiration dates, he was adamant that no renewals will be granted under any circumstances. This surgical strike is designed to create immediate chaos in the spot market and paralyze any American refinery currently caught between contract cycles. Industry analysts estimate that this policy immediately compromises 15% of total U.S. refining capacity, effectively orphaning roughly 2.7 million barrels of processing capability per day that now has no guaranteed feedstock. The ripple effect on gasoline and diesel prices at the pump is expected to be instantaneous, as Gulf Coast and Midwestern refineries scramble to find heavy crude replacements that simply do not exist in the necessary volumes. However, the pressure on the American energy grid does not stop at the pipeline. Carney further announced that starting March 10th, natural gas exports to the United States will be slashed by a massive 40% across the board. This is not a targeted reduction but a proportional hit to every existing U.S. buyer, meaning over 1 billion cubic feet of natural gas will vanish daily from a distribution network that is already strained. This reduction hits at a critical seasonal juncture. It is 1 billion cubic feet of energy that currently heats millions of homes in the Northeast and provides the essential fuel for baseload electrical generation across the Midwest during the unpredictable tail end of winter. By constricting the supply of natural gas, Canada is effectively reaching into the American power grid and turning down the dial, creating a scenario where price spikes are the best-case outcome and rolling blackouts or industrial curtailments become the grim reality for states dependent on Canadian transit. The scope of Ottawa's strategy extends far beyond the physical flow of oil and gas, reaching deep into the nervous system of the American economy, the financial sector. In a move that market analysts are describing as regulatory waterboarding, Prime Minister Carney has weaponized the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions (OSFI) by issuing a non-negotiable deadline of March 15th for all U.S. financial institutions operating within Canadian borders. These institutions are now mandated to comply with a suite of rigorous new regulatory disclosures and enhanced scrutiny requirements that were previously dismissed by Wall Street as mere posturing. For years, major American banks operated under the complacent assumption that Canadian resolve was flexible, or that bilateral ties were too big to fail. Consequently, the vast majority of these firms have not even begun the Herculean task of compiling the required documentation. They now find themselves in a frantic 8-day sprint to submit exhaustive data on every cross-border transaction, derivative position, and exposure to U.S. government securities. The penalty for failure is absolute: the immediate and total suspension of their Canadian banking licenses. Such a move would trigger a financial heart attack, forcing the chaotic fire sale unwinding of hundreds of billions in assets and the immediate shuttering of Canadian branches, effectively severing the financial arteries that connect the two economies. Simultaneously, Canada is executing a tactical blackout of the American power grid by refusing to renew any expiring electricity export agreements. This is not a future threat, but a rolling termination of supply that begins the moment current contracts lapse. Canada currently provides a continuous flow of approximately 1,400 megawatts of electricity to the United States, acting as the bedrock of grid stability for the Great Lakes region and the Northeast. As these agreements hit their expiration dates between now and the March 18th total rupture deadline, the lights will literally begin to dim in key industrial and residential hubs across New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. The strategic brilliance of this move lies in its timing. By cutting supply during the volatile transition from winter to spring, Canada is forcing American utilities into a desperate, high-cost scramble for alternative power sources that simply do not exist in the immediate term. To keep the heaters running and the factories humming, these utilities will be forced to fire up antiquated, high-emission coal plants or purchase natural gas at the very moment. Canada has already slashed gas exports by 40%. This creates a compounding crisis where energy costs for American consumers and businesses will not just rise, they will explode. The resulting grid instability threatens to trigger localized blackouts, dealing a devastating blow to U.S. manufacturing and further eroding public confidence in the administration's ability to maintain basic national infrastructure. Canada isn't just turning off the taps. They are systematically dismantling the structural pillars of American daily life, to prove that the Phase 1-inch pain is only a fraction of what is to come. The global financial markets, often the most honest barometer of geopolitical reality, reacted to Prime Minister Carney's announcement with a swiftness and ferocity that bordered on clinical. Within a single hour of the Ottawa press conference, the floor fell out from under energy stability. West Texas Intermediate, WTI crude oil futures for April delivery, underwent a violent upward correction, spiking 14.7% from $76.30 to a staggering $87.50 per barrel. This was not a standard market fluctuation. It was a panicked repricing of risk as traders realized the world's largest economy was being systematically decoupled from its primary energy supplier. Natural gas futures followed an even more aggressive trajectory, surging nearly 19% as the market began to calculate the catastrophic deficit of over 1 billion cubic feet of gas per day. The contagion quickly spread to the broader equities market, where the S&P 500 shed 3.8% of its value in just 2 hours of bone-jarring volatility. Investors, once skeptical of the Canadian ultimatum, have now pivoted to the grim realization that Phase 2, a total economic rupture, is no longer a distant tail risk but a mathematical probability. Inside the corridors of power in Washington, the atmosphere has curdled from defiant skepticism into a state of pure, unadulterated crisis. As the market indices bled red, a desperate emergency meeting was convened between the Secretary of Energy and the CEOs of the nation's largest oil refineries, natural gas utilities, and power providers. The message delivered by these executives was unified and devastating. The United States is currently incapable of sustaining its current levels of industrial and economic activity under these constraints. They informed the administration that the Phase 1-inch measures alone, those currently being implemented, will bleed the U.S. economy of an estimated $8 billion per week in lost productivity, surging overhead, and broken supply chains. The technical reality is that American heavy crude refineries are precision-engineered to process Canadian product. They cannot simply switch to alternative sources overnight without catastrophic operational delays and massive capital expenditures. Despite these warnings, the executive response remained one of deep-seated denial. Sources within the White House report that the president continues to insist Canada is merely engaged in a high-stakes bluff and will inevitably buckle under the weight of lost export revenue. However, industry experts and intelligence briefs have confirmed a much darker reality for the American position. Canada has already spent months quietly insulating itself. Ottawa has secured long-term, high-volume supply agreements with eager buyers across Asia and Europe, often at price points higher than those paid by U.S. domestic buyers. Far from losing money, Canada is actually projected to increase its sovereign revenue while successfully diversifying its trade portfolio. They aren't just surviving the split, they are thriving through it, leaving the United States isolated and tethered to a crumbling energy dependency, while Canada moves on to more stable, global partners. The political landscape in Washington has shifted with a violent, seismic speed that few insiders thought possible. In a rare and sobering display of bipartisanship, congressional leaders from both sides of the aisle, including high-ranking members who were once the president's staunchest defenders, held a joint press conference on the steps of the Capitol to deliver a unified ultimatum to the White House. The message was clear: the executive branch's strategy of brinkmanship has failed, and the legislative branch is prepared to take the reins to prevent national insolvency. Senate leaders, visibly shaken by the morning's intelligence briefings, warned that the United States has never occupied a weaker or more precarious diplomatic position in its modern history. While Washington remained fixated on internal politics, Canada was playing a masterclass in global statecraft, successfully rallying a coalition of 40 sovereign nations, including many of America's traditional G7 allies, to stand against U.S. trade policies. Even more devastating is the strategic partnership Ottawa has forged with Mexico, effectively creating a North American pincer that has isolated Washington within its own hemisphere. The internal pressure has reached a boiling point as rumors circulate through the halls of Congress that senior Republicans are actively meeting with constitutional scholars to explore veto-proof emergency legislation. This proposed legislative package is designed to bypass the White House entirely, unilaterally removing the tariffs that sparked the conflict, appropriating compensation funds for Canada, and legally mandating the administration to restore all defense and intelligence sharing obligations under the NORAD agreement. Carney's tactical brilliance is now fully on display. By front-loading the Phase 1-inch pain, he has created an environment where capitulation can be reframed not as a humiliating surrender, but as a pragmatic, heroic save of the American economy. He is providing the president's own party with the economic ammunition they need to force his hand, making the political cost of holding out far higher than the cost of giving in. As we stare down the remaining days until the March 18th deadline, the American future has narrowed into two stark, divergent paths. In the first scenario, the US government buckles under this immense internal and external pressure, yielding to Canada's 5 core demands to stop the immediate economic bleeding. While this would restore the flow of energy and stabilize the markets, it would effectively signal the end of the current presidency's executive autonomy, rendering the White House a ceremonial office governed by a bipartisan congressional regency. In the second, more catastrophic scenario, the March 18th deadline passes without compliance, triggering the immediate activation of Phase 2. This would involve the total and permanent cessation of all Canadian energy exports, the final dissolution of the NORAD alliance, and an economic collapse of such magnitude that analysts believe it could rival the Great Depression within weeks. With refineries shutting down, the grid failing, and financial markets in freefall, the country would face a constitutional crisis unlike anything seen since the Civil War. The time for speculation has ended. The nightmare is no longer a distant horizon, it has arrived at the front door.